Let's talk about our top story this morning. Boris Johnson's vowed to bring in new measures to tackle the cost of living crisis, but said spending was not the only answer.
No, speaking yesterday in Parliament, the PM confirmed he would be looking at new measures with the Chancellor in the coming days.
This government got the big calls right and made the tough decisions during the pandemic, that we had the fastest economic growth in the G7 last year and will return to that status, by the way, by 2024, Mr. Speaker, and therefore have the fiscal firepower to help families up and down the country with all the pressures they face now.
Well, his words come after the government was accused of not focusing enough on working families in the Queen's speech delivered yesterday by the Prince of Wales.
Now, one of the main concerns for all of us when it comes to the cost of living is energy prices. And that, of course, one thing which was really not addressed in the Queen's speech yesterday was it is causing a huge concern for a lot of people. So let's talk to Peter Smith, who's Director of Policy and Advocacy at National Energy Action. It's great to see you this morning because we need some answers, don't we, as to what actually can be done in the immediate term to ease these financial pressures on so many people.
Well, it's very clear that the government are going to need to respond adequately, particularly for the cost pressures facing the most vulnerable and low-income households across GB who are badly struggling with the soaring cost of energy, but also the soaring cost of other essentials. So far, the government has launched some support, the much-trumpeted £9 billion package of support aimed at offsetting energy costs through council tax rebates and a Heat Now, Pay Later loan. But the vast percentage of that investment, over two-thirds of it, about £6 billion, will need to be repaid directly by energy consumers. And it certainly isn't adequate to support the households that have got the deepest problems going into this energy crisis. The first priority for the government should be to improve that offer, particularly the Heat Now, Pay Later element. We've been campaigning strongly for that to be treated as a grant, particularly for prepayment households who we know are particularly hardest hit, most likely to be living on the lowest incomes and significantly in debt to their energy supplier. The next area is, well, what more can the government do, recognising that energy bills are going to massively increase again, likely a £500 increase we expect in October. What more can the government do to deploy further resources, particularly to target the people most affected by this energy crisis?
I mean, you've said that a couple of times now, that it needs to be particularly targeted at those that are most affected. And yet I heard you describing the council tax rebate there and lamenting that it isn't to all bands. It's only bands A to D, not E. I mean, isn't targeted help the best approach in all of this? Because we've so often seen these sorts of policies that often benefit people who don't need it.
Well, we believe that's absolutely right. We would like to see the government being far more, providing far deeper protection and more deeper support for the poorest households. The current support that they put in place sort of smooths the curve a little bit for everybody, but it doesn't recognise the deepest challenges that the poorest households are facing. There's often a vicious overlap between those households that are living on the lowest incomes, but also in the least efficient homes, meaning that they need to spend a far greater amount on energy just to stay warm. So there's much more the government can do. We know that the council tax rebate, the current council tax rebate, leaves about 600,000 households in England out in the cold who are living on the lowest incomes that live in higher bands. And we know that the Heat Now, Pay Later rebate will need to be repaid currently in a very, very regressive manner through the standing charge. Standing charges within energy bills need to be cleared before any units of energy can be accessed by households. And that means, sadly, that people often don't top up and will be living in their homes without any energy.
So we're almost out of time. I just want to ask you, because I was going to ask you something totally different, but you mentioned standing charge. We get so many people emailing in saying, my standing charge has gone up considerably. Now, why would that happen? You know, this is meant to be affecting fuel costs, not the other costs associated with energy.
Well, sadly, the regulator Ofgem has decided to pass the cost of failed suppliers through to consumers on the electricity side, through a massive increase in the standing charge. All consumers this period are paying about £70 extra in the standing charge. Add into that a range of additional government policies and other costs that could be recovered in a much more progressive manner through usage, for example. And that's leading to a massive headache and a big increase. That increase isn't consistent across all parts of GB either. There's some much bigger increases in Wales, for example, compared to other areas, and it's leading to a real patchwork in the ability of households to stay on supply and keep consuming energy in their home. That's pretty desperate in the summer and spring and the summer. People can't have warm showers. People can't do the things that they expect to be able to do, like flick on a light switch. But in winter, that can be deadly. And we know, sadly, that there's a very dangerous overlap between those households that live on the lowest incomes, also suffering with existing medical conditions, and the terrible impact that a cold home can have.
Peter Smith from the National Energy Action Group, thank you. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.